The war changed completely when General Thaxmore made his fatal mistake. Frustrated by the stubborn human resistance and mounting casualties among his troops, the Vorthak commander decided to send a message that would break human morale once and for all. His forces had captured 37 human civilians during raids on the outer settlements, including women, children, and elderly people who had been unable to evacuate in time. Thaxmore ordered these prisoners to be executed publicly and broadcast the killings across all human communication frequencies. He expected the humans to surrender immediately when they saw the price of continued resistance. Instead, the executions triggered something in human nature that no galactic civilization had ever witnessed before. Admiral Kate Phillips commanded the human fleet from her flagship, the Defiance. She was a calm professional officer who had earned her position through years of distinguished service in Earth's Space Navy. When the Vorthak transmission ended, Phillips sat quietly at her command station for nearly a minute, while her bridge crew waited for orders. Finally, she opened a direct communication channel to General Thaxmore. "General," her voice was steady and conversational, as if she were discussing routine military business. "You just crossed a line that we haven't let anyone cross in over 300 years. We gave you a chance to fight this war honorably, according to your rules and our willingness to show restraint. That offer is now permanently rescinded." Kethvar was monitoring all communications from his observation post and felt a chill run through his body when he heard Phillips speak. There was something in her tone that suggested the humans were about to abandon every convention of civilized warfare they had previously observed. Within hours, his fears were confirmed as reports flooded in from across the combat zone. The humans stopped taking prisoners. Captain Danny Roberts and his Ghost Battalion began leaving signs at the sites of their attacks, written in the Vorthak language and promising death to any enemy soldiers found harming civilians. The signs were decorated with symbols that Kethavar's cultural database identified as ancient human war paint, designs that had been used by their warriors thousands of years ago when they fought with primitive weapons on their home planet. Engineer Maya Patel had been working within the theoretical limits of galactic physics when she designed her improvised weapons. After the executions, she abandoned all safety protocols and began creating devices that operated far beyond established scientific boundaries. Her latest invention was something she called a gravitational disruptor, a weapon that could tear apart Vorthak ships at the molecular level by creating localized space-time distortions. When Kethavar asked how such a device was possible, Patel looked up from her work with eyes that burned with cold fury. "Ambassador, you'd be amazed what becomes possible when you get motivated enough. The Vorthak wanted to play by different rules, so we're showing them what human rules look like." The first test of Patel's gravitational disruptor destroyed a Vorthak cruiser so completely that it simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only empty space and confused sensor readings. The weapon required massive amounts of power and had a significant chance of destroying the ship that fired it, but human crews volunteered for the missions anyway. They called it acceptable risk in exchange for maximum damage to the enemy. Pilot Alex Chen led a squadron of modified civilian spacecraft in what they called redemption runs against the Vorthak fleet. These were deliberate suicide attacks using ships loaded with explosives and guided by human pilots who had volunteered to trade their lives for enemy casualties. Chen's squadron alone destroyed 6 Vorthak heavy cruisers in a single day, though none of the human pilots survived their missions. "They're insane," Kethvar transmitted to the Galactic Assembly in his daily report. "The humans are willing to sacrifice everything, their ships, their lives, their entire infrastructure, just to inflict casualties on the enemy. This isn't warfare anymore, it's mutual annihilation. They're fighting like they have nothing left to lose." Colonel Rick Turner found Kethavar in his quarters after intercepting the transmission. The human military liaison was a veteran officer with gray hair and the kind of steady presence that came from decades of military service. He sat down across from Kethvar and spoke in the patient tone of someone explaining something important to a confused child. "Ambassador, you're missing the point. We're not fighting like we have nothing left to lose, we're fighting like we have everything to protect. There's a big difference between those two things, and understanding that difference is the key to understanding humans." Kethavar tried to process this distinction, but it seemed like semantics to him. The result is the same, Colonel. You're accepting losses that any rational species would consider unacceptable. Turner nodded slowly. You're right about the losses, but wrong about the rationality. Let me ask you something. How much would your people pay to protect their children? How many resources would you sacrifice? How many lives would you risk? The question made Kethavar uncomfortable because Zephyrian culture had moved beyond such primitive emotional attachments. Their children were raised communally and considered assets of the state rather than personal possessions. We would use diplomatic channels to negotiate the safe return of any captured young people, he answered carefully. And if diplomacy failed? Turner pressed. If negotiation was impossible, and the only choice was between fighting and watching, your children die, what would you do? Kethavar had no answer because his people had never faced such a choice. Their civilization had eliminated most sources of conflict through careful social engineering and international cooperation. The idea of being forced to choose between violence and the safety of their young was beyond his experience. That's the difference between us and most galactic civilizations, Turner continued. You've all learned to avoid situations where violence becomes necessary. That's smart, and it's probably why the galaxy has been mostly peaceful for the past few centuries. But humans haven't learned to avoid those situations yet. We still remember what it feels like to fight for our survival, and we remember that sometimes fighting is the only option that matters. The Vorac began requesting reinforcements from their home command, then additional reinforcements when the first wave was destroyed. General Thaxmore's confident reports to his superiors became increasingly desperate requests for more troops, more ships, and more weapons. The humans were not just resisting, they were getting stronger as the conflict continued. Dr. Steve Martinez had started the war as a peaceful researcher, making improvised explosives in his laboratory. 2 weeks later, he was leading a team of scientists who had somehow learned to reverse engineer Vorac technology faster than anyone thought possible. They captured enemy weapons and had them duplicated and improved within days. They studied Vorac shield generators and created countermeasures that rendered enemy defenses useless. How are they doing this? Thaxmore demanded in a transmission that was intercepted by human intelligence. They're adapting faster than our development teams can create new equipment. Every weapon we deploy is obsolete within a week. Every tactic we use is countered before we can use it twice. The answer came from Dr. Linda Foster, a physicist who had been working with Martinez on weapons development. When Kethavar asked her to explain the human advantage, she smiled with the grim satisfaction of someone who had found the solution to an impossible problem. Ambassador, the Vorac developed their technology through committees and testing and approval processes that take months or years. They're very careful and very thorough, which is probably why their equipment is so reliable. But humans develop technology through desperation and necessity, which means we can go from concept to deployment in a matter of days. She led him to a laboratory where teams of humans were working around the clock to create new weapons and defenses. When someone is trying to kill your family, you don't have time for proper procedures and safety protocols. You just have to make it work, fix the problems later, and hope it's good enough to keep your people alive. That kind of pressure makes you very creative very quickly. Kethavar realized that he was watching something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans were not just fighting a war, they were evolving as a species in real time, driven by pressures that would have broken most civilizations. And somehow, impossibly, they were winning. The Vorac fleet arrived exactly when their intelligence predicted, dropping out of hyperspace with the precision that had made them feared across the galaxy. General Thaxmore commanded from his flagship, a massive dreadnought that could reduce planets to rubble. Kethavar watched from the observation deck as the enemy ships formed their battle lines, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that had conquered dozens of worlds. What happened next changed everything Kethavar thought he knew about warfare. Instead of trying to evacuate their civilians or negotiate for terms, the humans did something that violated every principle of civilized conflict. They declared what they called total mobilization. Dr. Sam Martinez had been studying alien plant life in his laboratory on New Haven just days before. Now he was manufacturing explosives using equipment meant for genetic research. Kethvar watched through the colony's surveillance feeds as the scientist worked with steady hands, converting peaceful research tools into weapons of war. When asked about his transformation from scholar to bomb maker, Martinez simply said that everyone had to do their part. Maria Santos taught children in the colony's primary school. Her classroom walls were covered with colorful drawings and educational posters about Earth's history. Now those same walls displayed tactical maps and communication schedules. Santos was training her older students in guerrilla warfare techniques, teaching them how to move unseen through the colony's service tunnels and how to sabotage equipment without getting caught. The children listened with the same attention they had once given to mathematics lessons. Even the elderly humans joined the war effort in ways that shocked Kethvar's understanding of proper civilian behavior. Frank Wilson was 78 years old and needed a walking stick to move around his apartment. But his mind was sharp, and he had volunteered to coordinate communications between resistance cells. Wilson's living room became a command center where retired humans tracked Vorac movements and passed intelligence to active fighters. This is completely against galactic law, Kethvar reported to his superiors via encrypted transmission. The humans are involving their entire population in military operations. They're using civilians as combatants, children as support personnel, and elderly individuals as intelligence coordinators. This violates at least 17 different articles of the Galactic Convention on Civilized Warfare. Commander Hayes found him making the report and waited for him to finish before speaking. Ambassador, with all due respect to your galactic conventions, the Vorac didn't exactly send us a formal declaration of war with terms and conditions. They just showed up and started killing our people. Kethvar tried to explain the importance of maintaining civilized standards even during conflict, but Hayes cut him off with a gesture that seemed both patient and firm. Let me ask you something, Ambassador. If someone broke into your home and threatened your family, would you fight them with one hand tied behind your back because of proper procedure? Or would you use everything you had to protect the people you love? The question made Kethvar uncomfortable because he did not have a good answer. Zephyrian society had eliminated most forms of personal violence centuries ago through careful social engineering and diplomatic protocols. The idea of fighting for family with desperate intensity was foreign to his understanding of rational behavior. The Vorac began their attack with standard orbital bombardment, targeting military installations and government buildings. General Thaxmore expected this to break human morale and lead to immediate surrender negotiations. Instead, the bombardment revealed something terrifying about human nature that no one had anticipated. The humans scattered like water when the bombs fell, but they did not run away. They moved into the ruins and kept fighting. When the colony's main power grid was destroyed, they rigged emergency generators to keep essential systems running. When their ammunition factories were hit, they started making explosives from mining equipment and agricultural chemicals. When their communication towers were knocked down, they used personal devices to maintain contact between fighting groups. Captain Danny Roberts led a unit that called itself the Ghost Battalion. These humans painted their faces with dark colors and moved through the colony's underground tunnels like shadows. They appeared from nowhere to attack Vorac supply convoys, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Roberts and his people took no prisoners and left no survivors, fighting with an intensity that made even hardened Vorac soldiers nervous. Kethvar requested permission to interview some of the Ghost Battalion fighters to understand their motivation. Roberts agreed to meet him in one of the abandoned buildings that served as a temporary base. The human soldier was young, maybe 25 standard years, with scars on his hands from recent fighting and eyes that seemed older than his face. "Why do you fight this way?" Kethvar asked. "Your tactics are effective, but they're also incredibly dangerous. You could be killed at any moment." Roberts cleaned his rifle while he talked, his hands moving with the automatic precision of someone who had performed the same task thousands of times. "My little sister lives in Sector 7 with her husband and their baby. The Vorac bombed Sector 7 on the first day, and now they're sending ground troops to secure the area. I'm not fighting for territory or resources, Ambassador. I'm fighting to keep aliens from hurting my family." "But surely there are more rational approaches," Kethvar suggested. "Negotiation, strategic withdrawal, appeals to galactic authority. Roberts looked up from his weapon with an expression of complete sincerity. Ambassador, with respect, when someone threatens your family, rational doesn't matter anymore. What matters is making sure they can't hurt the people you love, no matter what it costs you personally. The conversation was interrupted by an explosion in the distance. Roberts immediately grabbed his equipment and prepared to leave. That's probably the Vorac trying to take the water treatment plant. We can't let them control our water supply, so I need to go convince them to leave. He paused at the door and looked back at Kethvar. You want to understand humans? Remember this. We don't fight wars to win. We fight wars to protect, and we'll do whatever it takes to protect what matters to us. Engineering teams led by Maya, Patel had converted the colony's mining equipment into weapons that defied conventional military thinking. They used gravity manipulation tools to turn asteroids into kinetic bombardment weapons, launching chunks of rock at Vorac ships with enough force to crack their armor. When the enemy tried to establish a secure perimeter around their landing zones, Patel's people used industrial explosives to create sinkholes that swallowed entire Vorac units. The Vorac had conquered 47 different worlds using the same basic strategy. Overwhelming force followed by occupation and integration into their empire. But the humans refused to follow the script. Every building they lost became a fortress for the next group of defenders. Every civilian they lost was replaced by 2 more volunteers. Every piece of equipment the Vorac destroyed was replaced by something improvised from spare parts and determination. General Thaxmore sent increasingly frustrated reports to his high command. The humans were not fighting like any civilized species he had encountered. They seemed willing to sacrifice anything and everything to inflict casualties on his forces. Worse, they were learning and adapting faster than his analysts thought possible. Tactics that worked on the first day were useless by the third day because the humans had already figured out countermeasures. Kethvar realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans were not just fighting a war, they were redefining what war meant. They had taken the concept of total conflict and made it personal, immediate, and absolutely ruthless. And somehow, against all military logic, it was working. Ambassador Kethvar stood on the bridge of the neutral observation ship and watched the human fleet through the viewing screen. His tall, thin body swayed slightly as he adjusted to the ship's movement. The Zephyrian diplomat had seen many wars in his long life, but something felt different about this one. The humans were new to the galaxy, discovered only 3 years ago when they sent their first signals beyond their home system. Most new species spent decades learning galactic politics before they faced any real conflict. The humans had barely learned to speak the common galactic language when the Vorac Empire decided to invade their colonies. The Vorac were known across the galaxy as efficient conquerors. They moved fast, hit hard, and most species surrendered after losing their first battle. It was the smart thing to do when facing superior numbers and technology. The Galactic Assembly had sent Kethvar to observe and document what everyone expected would be a quick human surrender, followed by negotiations for refugee status. Captain Jake Morrison of the human command ship New Horizon had other ideas. When the Vorac fleet arrived at the edge of human space and demanded immediate surrender, Morrison sent back a message that made Kethvar's translator work overtime. The exact words were apparently too crude for the diplomatic language protocols, but the meaning was clear enough. The humans were going to fight. Kethvar had reviewed the tactical reports before coming here. The humans had established 3 small colonies in the Kepler 442 system. Each colony held maybe 50,000 people, mostly families who had volunteered to leave Earth and start new lives among the stars. They had basic mining equipment, some agricultural systems, and a handful of security ships that were barely worthy of the name. The Vorac brought a full battle fleet with enough firepower to crack planets. The first 2 human colonies fell within days. Standard procedure would be for the survivors to evacuate the 3rd colony and retreat to Earth, where they could ask the Galactic Assembly for protection. Instead, the humans did something that puzzled every military expert in the observation fleet. They sent more ships to the remaining colony and started digging in for a fight. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes met Kethvar when he transferred to the human command ship to begin his official observations. She was young by galactic standards, probably less than 30 standard years old, with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to hold too much knowledge for her age. Most species promoted their military leaders based on experience and wisdom, gained over centuries. The humans apparently trusted their young people with incredible responsibility. Hayes led Kethvar through the corridors of the New Horizon while explaining the human command structure. The ship hummed with activity as crew members ran from station to station, carrying data tablets and shouting orders in their rapid, energetic language. Everything moved fast with the humans, Kethvar noticed. They seemed incapable of standing, still or speaking slowly. "Ambassador, we appreciate the Assembly sending an observer," Hayes said as they walked. "But I should warn you up front that humans probably don't fight wars the way your people are used to seeing." Kethvar tilted his head in the Zephyrian expression of curiosity. His people had observed conflicts involving 43 different species over the past millennium. The basic patterns were always the same. "How so, Commander?" Hayes stopped walking and turned to face him. Her expression was serious but not unfriendly. "Most species in the galaxy seem to treat war like a business transaction. You calculate costs, weigh benefits, and surrender when the math doesn't work out. Humans see war differently." "How do humans see war?" Kethvar asked, genuinely interested. He had been briefing himself on human culture for weeks, but their military philosophy remained unclear. "We see it as personal," Hayes said simply. "When someone attacks our colonies, they're not just threatening our territory or our resources. They're threatening our families, our children, our future. That makes it personal, and humans take personal threats very seriously." They reached the observation deck where Kethvar would be stationed for the duration of the conflict. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see the third human colony, New Haven, floating in the distance. The small world looked peaceful. From here, its surface covered in the geometric patterns of human agriculture and the bright dots of small cities. It was hard to imagine it as a battleground. "The Vorac fleet will arrive within 2 days, Hayes continued. "General Thaxmore commands their forces and he's never lost a campaign. His standard procedure is orbital bombardment followed by ground invasion. Most species surrender after the bombardment begins. Will the humans surrender?" Kethvar asked. Hayes smiled, and for a moment Kethvar saw something in her expression that made his diplomatic instincts warn him of danger. It was not fear or anger, but something colder and more determined. "Ambassador, let me tell you something about humans. We're a young species, and we've only been in space for a few generations. But we've been fighting each other on our home planet for thousands of years. We've learned some things about warfare that maybe the rest of the galaxy hasn't figured out yet." Kethvar waited for her to continue, but Hayes seemed lost in thought. Finally, she spoke again. "The Vorac probably think this will be easy because we're outnumbered and outgunned. They're right about the numbers and the technology, but they're making one big mistake." "What mistake is that?" "They think humans fight wars to win territory or resources or political advantage," Hayes said, still looking out at the colony. "But that's not why we're here. We're here because those people down there are our people and nobody gets to hurt our people without consequences. The Vorac can probably take that colony if they're willing to pay the price. The question is whether they understand what the price is going to be." That evening, Kethvar sent his first report to the Galactic Assembly. He described the human preparations, their apparent determination to fight despite impossible odds, and his growing sense that something unprecedented was about to happen. The humans were treating this conflict like nothing he had observed in decades of diplomatic service. Captain Morrison appeared on the ship's communication system that night to address the crew. His voice carried throughout the ship as he spoke to the thousands of humans preparing for battle. "Tomorrow the Vorac arrive, and they expect us to run away like scared children. They think because we're new to space that we're weak. They're about to learn that being new doesn't mean being weak. It just means we haven't learned to give up yet." The crew cheered, and Kethvar felt a chill run through his body. He had the sudden feeling that the galaxy was about to discover something new about warfare, and he was not sure anyone was prepared for what the humans were about to teach them. The war ended in a way that shocked every military expert in the Galactic Assembly. Instead of accepting Vorthak's surrender and negotiating terms for peace, the humans did something unprecedented in galactic history. They followed the retreating enemy fleet all the way back to the Vorthak home system, not to conquer their worlds, but to deliver a message that would reshape interstellar politics forever. Admiral Kate Phillips stood on the bridge of the Defiance as it emerged from hyperspace. Above the Vorthak homeworld, around her flagship, the entire human fleet materialized in perfect formation, their ships bearing the scars of battle but flying with the confidence of victorious warriors. The sight of an alien fleet in orbit above their most protected world sent panic through the Vorthak government and military command. Kethavar had been granted permission to witness this final confrontation, though he struggled to understand what the humans hoped to accomplish. They had already rescued their prisoners and destroyed the expeditionary force that had invaded their colonies. By galactic law and custom, the conflict should have ended with Vorthak withdrawal and reparations negotiations. Instead, the humans had pursued their enemies across a dozen star systems and now threatened the heart of a major galactic empire. The Vorthak High Council opened emergency communications with the human fleet, expecting demands for unconditional surrender or territorial concessions. Instead, Admiral Phillips delivered a message that was both simpler and more threatening than anyone anticipated. Vorthak High Council, this is Admiral Phillips of the Human Defense Fleet. We have recovered our children, all of them, and they are safe. We have destroyed the forces responsible for their capture and mistreatment. Now we're here to discuss the future. Her voice carried across space with crystal clarity, reaching not only the Vorthak leadership, but also the neutral observation, vessels and diplomatic missions that had gathered to witness this unprecedented confrontation. Phillips continued speaking in the same calm, conversational tone that had characterized her communications throughout the war. You are going to find every other species you have taken slaves from, and you are going to return them to their families. You are going to compensate the relatives of everyone you killed during your conquests. You are going to provide medical care and support for everyone you harmed, and you are going to remember that there are consequences for your actions. The Vorthak Chancellor tried to negotiate, offering partial compliance and gradual implementation of the human demands. Phillips listened to his response with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world and the firepower to enforce any decision she made. Chancellor, I think you misunderstood. Those weren't requests or negotiating positions, those were statements of fact about what you are going to do. The only question is whether you do them voluntarily or whether we convince you to do them involuntarily. To demonstrate her point, Phillips ordered a single human ship to fire one shot at an abandoned Vorthak military station in the outer system. The weapon, one of Dr. Martinez's improved planet crackers, erased the installation so completely that sensors showed only empty space where it had existed moments before. That was a demonstration, Phillips explained. We have enough of those weapons to remove every military installation in your system, and we've proven that we're willing to use them. We prefer cooperation, but we'll accept compliance achieved through intimidation if that's what it takes. The Vorthak High Council agreed to every human demand within hours. They began immediately releasing slaves from dozens of different species, providing reparations to families they had destroyed, and establishing monitoring systems to ensure continued compliance with human requirements. But Admiral Phillips had one more message to deliver. There's something else you need to understand, she said in a transmission that was broadcast across the entire Vorthak communication network. We're leaving a monitoring station in your system, not to control you, but to watch. Because we've learned something about ourselves during this war, something that we never wanted to learn. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a note of sadness that made Kethavar realize how much the conflict had cost the humans in ways that had nothing to do with ships or casualties. We've learned that we're very good at warfare, terrifyingly good. We're efficient at violence, creative with destruction, and absolutely ruthless when our families are threatened. We never wanted to discover these things about ourselves, and we never want to have to use these abilities again. So we're going to make sure that no one forces us to. This monitoring station will watch for signs of slavery, genocide, or systematic oppression anywhere in this region of space. If we detect these activities, we will respond immediately and permanently, not because we want to rule the galaxy, but because we want to prevent the conditions that force us to become the kind of people we had to become during this war. Captain Morrison, who had started the conflict with a simple message of defiance, found Kethvar in the observation lounge as the human fleet prepared to return home. The human officer looked tired but satisfied, like someone who had completed a difficult job that needed to be done. "Ambassador, what will you tell the Galactic Assembly about us?" Morrison asked. Kethvar had been struggling with that question for weeks. His official report would reshape how the galaxy viewed humanity, and he wanted to be accurate about what he had witnessed. He looked out at the human fleet, ships bearing names like Perseverance, Hope, Second Chance, and Never Again, and realized that he finally understood what made humans different from every other species in the galaxy. "I will tell them that humans fight wars like they are protecting their children, because that is exactly what you do. Every conflict, no matter how large or small, becomes personal for your people. You don't fight for territory or resources, or political advantage. You fight to protect the people you love, and that makes you both the most terrifying and the most inspiring species the galaxy has ever encountered." Morrison nodded slowly. "That's probably accurate. We never set out to become galactic peacekeepers or to intimidate entire civilizations. We just wanted to live quietly in our little corner of space and raise our families in peace. But when someone threatens our children, we discover that we're capable of things that scare even us." The human fleet departed the Vorac System 3 days later, leaving behind a monitoring station and a warning that would echo across the galaxy for generations. The Galactic Assembly held emergency sessions to discuss the implications of human military capabilities, and within months, new protocols were established for resolving conflicts without triggering human intervention. Kethvar submitted his final report 6 weeks after returning to assembly space. The document was classified at the highest levels and shared only with senior diplomatic and military officials. Its conclusions were simple but revolutionary. Humanity represented a new type of galactic citizen, one that combined advanced technology with primitive emotional drives in ways that made them uniquely dangerous and uniquely valuable. They had proven capable of military innovations that exceeded the best efforts of established civilizations, driven by motivations that transcended rational cost-benefit analysis. Most importantly, they had demonstrated that some lines should never be crossed, and that there existed a species willing to enforce those lines regardless of the personal cost. The galaxy was safer because humans were willing to be dangerous when necessary, and more peaceful because everyone now understood the consequences of pushing a family-oriented species beyond its limits. The humans returned to their colonies and resumed their quiet lives among the stars. But everyone knew that something fundamental had changed. The galaxy had guardians now, reluctant warriors who preferred peace but were prepared for war. And somehow that knowledge made the universe feel both more dangerous and more secure than it had ever been before. Years later, when other species faced extinction or enslavement, they would send simple messages to human space. "Help us," those messages would say. "Protect our children." And the humans would come, not because they sought glory or conquest, but because some things were worth fighting for no matter what the cost. Kethvar often wondered if the humans understood what they had become. In trying to save their own children, they had become the galaxy's protectors. In refusing to surrender, they had become the final arbiters of what civilized behavior meant among the stars. And somehow, that seemed perfectly human to him. The turning point came when Sergeant Tim Brooks discovered something that changed the entire nature of the conflict. Brooks led a reconnaissance team that had been tracking Vorac supply movements through the colony's outer regions. During a raid on what they thought was an enemy ammunition depot, his team found something far worse than weapons or equipment. The building contained cages. Inside those cages were human children, some as young as 5 or 6 years old, who had been taken from the first 2 colonies before they were destroyed. The children were thin, frightened, and bearing signs of mistreatment that made Brooks and his hardened soldiers weep with rage. Among them were teenagers who had been forced to work as laborers and young adults who showed signs of systematic abuse. Brooks immediately contacted Fleet Command with the discovery. His report was brief and filled with barely controlled fury. "Command, this is Recon 7. We've found our missing people from Colonies 1 and 2. The Vorthak have been using them as slaves. We count 43 children, 17 teenagers, and 26 adults. They're alive, but they need immediate medical attention and extraction." The report reached Admiral Phillips within minutes, and she immediately called an emergency meeting of all human military commanders. Kethvar was granted permission to observe the meeting, though he quickly regretted being present for what followed. The human officers displayed levels of controlled rage that made his diplomatic training completely inadequate for the situation. Captain Morrison spoke first, his voice tight with anger. "Recommendations?" "Total war," replied Colonel Turner without hesitation. "No more rules, no more restraint, no more consideration for galactic conventions. They want to play this game. We show them how humans play." "Agreed," said Admiral Phillips. "New rules of engagement effective immediately. Priority 1 is recovering our people. Priority 2 is ensuring the Vorthak never threaten anyone's children again." She opened a communication channel that broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that both her own forces and the Vorthak would hear her next words. "Attention all human units. All previous rules of engagement are hereby suspended. We have confirmed that the enemy has taken our children as slaves. You are authorized to use any means necessary to recover our people and punish those responsible. No quarter asked, none given." The transformation in human tactics was immediate and terrifying. Captain Nicole Green had been commanding a defensive squadron protecting supply lines between the colony and the main fleet. After receiving the new orders, she took her ships on a hunting expedition that lasted 72 hours and resulted in the complete destruction of 8 Vorthak cruisers and 2 supply convoys. Green's ships moved through space like predators, using tactics that violated every principle of safe navigation and ship handling. They jumped out of hyperspace at point-blank range, fired everything they had, and jumped away before the enemy could respond. When Vorthak ships tried to run, Green's pilots followed them through hyperspace jumps that should have been impossible to track. "How are they doing this?" General Thaxmore demanded, in another, intercepted transmission. "Their navigation should not be accurate enough for precision jumps, and their ships are not fast enough to pursue our cruisers. Yet they appear from nowhere and vanish before we can coordinate a response." The answer came from Chief Engineer Maya Patel, who had been working around the clock to upgrade human ships with captured Vorthak technology. When Kethvar visited her workshop, he found organized chaos as teams of humans stripped enemy equipment and installed it in their own vessels with modifications that made his technical advisors nervous. "We're not following the instruction manuals," Patel explained while directing her teams to install a Vorthak hyperdrive in a human corvette. "The enemy builds their technology to be reliable and safe, which means it operates well below its theoretical capabilities. We're pushing everything to maximum performance and accepting the risks." She showed him a Vorthak shield generator that her people had modified to produce twice the normal power output. "This thing might explode and vaporize the entire ship, but it also makes us nearly invulnerable for the few minutes it runs. When you're trying to rescue kidnapped children, a few minutes of invulnerability is worth the risk of dying." Dr. Steve Martinez had expanded his weapons research beyond anything seen in galactic history. Working with a team of scientists who had abandoned all safety protocols, he created what they called planet crackers, weapons designed specifically to destroy Vorthak capital ships. These devices used principles of physics that most civilizations considered too dangerous to experiment with, but Martinez's team built them anyway. "We call this one the Child's Wrath," Martinez said, showing Kethvar a weapon that looked like a metallic sphere covered in warning symbols. "It creates a micro-black hole that lasts for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to tear apart anything within a kilometer radius, not long enough to become a permanent gravitational hazard." Kethvar stared at the device in horror. That technology could destroy entire planets if something goes wrong. Martinez nodded calmly. Yes, it could, but it can also punch through Vorthak armor like it's made of paper, and right now that matters more than safety considerations. When someone takes our children, we stop caring about collateral damage. The human rescue operations began 3 days after Brooks discovered the prisoners. Teams of volunteers in modified ships equipped with Patel's impossible technology and Martinez's devastating weapons launched coordinated attacks on every Vorthak facility in the system. They ignored enemy fire, crashed through defensive perimeters, and extracted their people with a precision that defied military logic. Pilot Alex Chen had survived his earlier suicide missions and now led rescue flights that were only slightly less dangerous. His squadron specialized in precision insertions, landing their ships in impossible locations to extract human prisoners before Vorthak guards could react. Chen's pilots took casualties that would have broken most military units, but they kept flying because every mission brought more of their people home. We lost 4 ships and 12 pilots today, Chen reported after a particularly difficult rescue operation. But we brought back 36 kids and their teachers from the school ship that got captured last month. I call that a victory. The Vorthak military command finally began to understand what they were facing when General Thaxmore received a personal message from Admiral Phillips. The human commander appeared on his screen wearing a clean uniform and speaking in the same calm professional tone she had used throughout the conflict. General Thaxmore, this is Admiral Phillips of the Human Defense Fleet. I want you to understand your situation clearly. You have taken our children and used them as slaves. This is not a political dispute or a territorial conflict anymore. This is a family matter, and humans take family matters very seriously. She paused to let her words sink in before continuing. We are going to recover every single one of our people that you have taken. We are going to destroy every ship and facility involved in holding them prisoner, and we are going to make sure that you and your entire chain of command understand that there are consequences for harming human children. This is not a negotiation or a threat. This is a simple statement of fact. You can surrender now and face galactic justice for your crimes, or you can keep fighting and face human justice. I recommend surrender, because human justice tends to be much more personal and much more permanent. Thaxmore tried to respond with his own threats and demands, but Phillips had already cut the transmission. Within hours, every Vorthak position in the system came under attack by human forces that fought with an intensity that bordered on supernatural. They moved like they were personally offended by the enemy's existence, and they hit targets with weapons that should not have been possible to create or deploy. By the end of that week, the Vorthak Expeditionary Force had been reduced to scattered remnants hiding in asteroid fields and calling desperately for reinforcements that would never be enough. The humans had rescued all of their prisoners and turned their attention to hunting down every enemy soldier who had been involved in their capture and mistreatment. Kethvar realized that he was no longer observing a war. He was witnessing the birth of something new and terrifying, a species that had learned to wage total war not for conquest or resources, but for family. And he was beginning to understand why that made them the most dangerous force the galaxy had ever seen.